Well, welcome back to Books to Die For, brought to you by the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Our guest today will be an author, and he was a host with House of Mystery as well, John Copenhaver. Thank you for being on the show.
Hey, Al. It's fun to be on as an author instead of an interviewer, although I enjoy that greatly as well.
Yeah, but you get asked the questions now. You're under the spotlight.
I am. I have to. I better perform right. I better get it right.
Yeah, be correct here. So now you've got a new book coming out June 4th. It's called Hall of Mirrors, and it's a novel. So this is a Judy, Nightingale, and Philippa Watson mystery. So let's talk about that book. So what's the basic premise of the book to start out with?
Yeah, so it is the second book in a trilogy. The Savage Kind that came out in 2021 is the first involving both these characters, Judy Nightingale and Philippa Watson, who were in 1948, teenage girls. This book, Hall of Mirrors, takes them to 1954 during the height of the McCarthy era in Washington, D.C. And it's a mystery novel, so like Savage Kind, the girls, now young women, are solving a mystery having to do with their favorite crime writer, Ray Kane, who features, or at least his name features, in the first book. In this one, we find out that Ray Kane is actually two gay men who write underneath the pseudonym of Ray Kane. Roger, one of the couple, works for the State Department, and if you know anything about the McCarthy era in Washington, D.C., you know about the Red Scare and perhaps the Lavender Scare. The Lavender Scare was a time in history when there were state-sanctioned firings of, a lot of them were State Department employees, but government employees who were gay and lesbian. It was also, they were outed during this process, and in the 1950s being outed was, of course, something considered very shameful for that time period, and they would lose their livelihood, their families would be destroyed. A lot of these men and women really struggled. Some of them even took their own lives. So it was a terrible time of prejudice in that period. So I was really interested in taking characters, particularly these two men, and looking at sort of the impact that time period had on them. I know it's a fascinating time period, but pretty complex and socially conservative and problematic.
Yeah, it was a pretty intense time, right?
Yeah.
It was the old-fashioned way of canceling because people were losing their jobs. It was really big with Hollywood, right? A lot of Hollywood stars and Hedda Hopper was going after anybody that they thought was a commie, and they'd lose their job. And then gay and lesbian and even black Americans were under fire because anytime someone protested, they figured it was to do with communism.
Yeah, I think in many ways they were using the threat of communism as the tool to consolidate power and as an excuse for discriminating against, as you mentioned, black people and certainly anyone who was interested in communism. We're not talking about folks that were trying to infiltrate the government, but simply folks who were interested in it as a political philosophy. And of course, queer people were all, anyone, honestly, that was an outsider in a particularly sort of patriarchal time period was under great scrutiny. You want to explore these things in a book, right? But you can explore them pretty directly, but I really enjoy mystery stories, so I really wanted to explore them through an interesting and kind of exciting thriller tale, but also kind of get at some of these deeper issues of the time period.
Now, your mystery novelist dies, like one of them in this book. So did you have someone in mind? Or did this just, or were this couple, you said a biracial couple that's writing a book under the name.
Yeah.
So were you inspired by any writers yourself, any people that you know maybe that inspired this couple, these two people?
Well, this idea came about because I learned about the writer Patrick Quentin. There were several different writers writing underneath his name, but one of them was a pair of writers who were thought to be gay. I never quite confirmed that, but a lot of people feel that was the case. They wrote under this name great mystery novels and stories. It's just I just sort of got a little like spark of inspiration, and they were writing during this time period, by the way, a little spark of inspiration from learning about that. I've always been fascinated by writing pairs because, frankly, I would find it very difficult to do that. But I loved it, and I thought there was a potential for an interesting mystery here. And my story begins with one of them dead, being burned in a fire. And then the other is trying to, of course, help with Judy and Philippa's help figure out what happened. The question that continues to come up for me during this is, what does it mean to be sort of writing underneath a pseudonym? What does it mean to be in the closet? What does it mean to pass? Because Judy passes as white, but she's not. Lionel, the character, the living part of the duo, the writing duo, is black, but he's been writing underneath, with the face of his lover and co-writer on the cover. So he's been sort of writing, and of course this time period, they had to do these things. They had to do those things to survive. Like passing was part of surviving, and I wanted to explore that because I think sometimes we take that for granted today. That folks had to conceal their true selves, not because they wanted to, not because they were trying to be deceptive, but because survival required it. And so I think that was very much an avenue I wanted to go down with this book, and also sort of playing with the idea of if you're not who you appear to be, then who are you to yourself and to the world, and letting a mystery kind of pull us along through that sort of exploration as well.
I've heard you read part of it when we were doing the noir for the bar. So
right.
Did you write it from just the same person's perspective, the one lover that survived, throughout the whole book, or do you go to different people?
Yeah, so I cover two perspectives. One is Lionel, the lover who survives. A portion of that is what I read. I think it was maybe the first chapter of it that I read for Noir at the bar. And then the second is from Judy's perspective. And Judy, of course, is a carryover character from The Savage Kind. I wanted two perspectives. There's sort of structural reasons, plot reasons why I needed that to occur. But I also really wanted both these characters who are concealing themselves in different ways for different reasons, to sort of, for us to be getting their inner voices and to sort of, go on that journey with them. I think it's also exciting for a reader to kind of get to more than one perspective, particularly if you're thinking about a crime. And for whatever reason in my books, and this is true for all of my books, I always have a crime which is really open to interpretation. And in Hall of Mirrors, we have an apartment fire with a dead body. We're not even 100% sure that the body is Roger, Lionel's lover, but it could possibly be, it may not be. So there's a lot of interpretation going on in an attempt to understand that. And from two perspectives, Lionel's and Judy's and Philippa's as well. So I love playing with that constantly shifting perspective on things. I think it's fun as a reader to experience that, and then you get to explore sort of, appearance versus reality and that kind of thing as well. It was really fun. Both voices were really fun to write.
Well, is there a reason why you don't want them to know who the body was or who it belonged to and all that? Do you want to focus on other things, or what's the reason in writing that way?
Well, I mean, one is there's a mystery, all right? I'm essentially setting out to draw that question up for the reader, like, is this Roger's body or is this someone else's body? Is this, if so, who? If it is Roger, why? The initial, early on, the police were like, well, it was a suicide. This guy put his head in the oven and because he had been fired from the State Department and outed, and so he went into his life. Almost all the characters, say that's BS. All the characters we care about know that's got to be BS in some way. And I definitely wanted to run against the narrative of a gay man killing himself. It did happen. It was true. But I also didn't want that to be the story. But I think it presents a question, ultimately, to the reader, and you can continue to sort of pull the layers back on that question, and it becomes not just, of course, who did it, it also becomes, who is it? And so it's like a double question. Is it, we don't even know who the body is necessarily at the beginning. So why not ask more questions? There's just more things to discover for the reader. So I think it's really why I came to that kind of device as a crime writer. Thematic reasons, I think it has a lot to do, as this is also the theme of my work, be careful of making assumptions about people. As a gay man myself, I think people make a lot of assumptions. When I was in the closet, and I was married for a time to a woman, people made a lot of assumptions, in some cases rightfully so, but I think that I'm very interested in, even now, as a gay man, people make assumptions about you. And I think this is something that I constantly like to undermine as a writer. I think it's important for us to look past our first assumptions. As a reader, or as a consumer of stories in all fashions, I love it when my assumptions are sort of turned on their head. I think that's exciting because, you kind of realize there's so much more to the world than you're giving it credit for. And there's more to people than we sometimes give them credit for. So
when you're writing two lead characters from their points of view, how do you make it so that people don't get confused on who's doing the talking when you first get into a chapter?
Yeah, so this is a big craft question. I both have dealt with on my own in a variety of different ways in my writing, and I have, I'm also a teacher, so I've sort of instructed students on this, and it's tricky. For Hall of Mirrors, I made the choice to put Lionel in the present tense and Judy in the past tense. It works well because Lionel's sort of narrative is much more like this, a tighter time frame, a more quickly unfolding mystery. It's just really going down in a matter of a few days. The Judy, points of view happen over years. And then they, of course, as when you're dealing with points of view in fiction, they will ultimately intersect. But I thought, present tense for Lionel because of the urgency, made a lot of sense. In my first book, Dodging and Burning, which was a standalone and was my debut, I had two characters, Ciola and Bunny, and they both came from the same hometown. They both were, not that far apart in age. And in an early version of that novel, they just sounded too much alike. And folks were saying, I'm having trouble keeping track of which character is which. And I said, okay, I have to do something that really distinguishes them. And I did a rewrite of that novel in which Ciola is no longer college educated, and she's addressing her dead brother, which is an important plot point in that novel. The addressing of the brother and the changing of words that she would use, what kind of diction she would use, really helped distinguish her from Bunny, who is very worldly and educated, and a little snooty. And so their voices pop. But when you're writing, more than one perspective, you do have to find ways to distinguish the perspectives. Readers will get lost. And so I think it's very important to ground them that way. I have to deal with students who all their characters kind of sound the same. Like, you need to dig into their points of view a little bit more and give them different voices. And sometimes to do that, you just have to find what ultimately shapes their voice. What is it? Education? Is it environment? Is it attitude? There's all sorts of things, but you have to think through those things a little bit to make sure that they stand out.
How is it that you can write from a woman's point of view, for instance, like you're talking about Judy as one of the characters you write from their point of view. So how do you get into that mindset and able to pull it off to where it sounds like Judy Nightingale?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because I've been asked a lot. I almost all my novels have female protagonists. In fact, Lionel is my first male point of view character. In my first book, there's a very important central character who is a gay man, but he doesn't really have a full point of view, I should say. But I think that it's never been this big leap for me in terms of like getting to, it wasn't like this sort of, big task that I had to do. And I think this largely has to do with the fact that I grew up around a lot of various strong female influences in my life. His voices came really naturally to me, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think I had those rhythms in my head already. I think it goes back to like don't assume, don't assume that the way someone shows up in the world necessarily indicates their experiences. And when you grow up around a lot of strong women, which I did, my dad died when I was pretty young, and my brothers were much older than me, left home, so I was sort of home, and my mom and other really sort of key figures in my life, and then a lot of teachers who were women who influenced me greatly. So I think these voices kind of came naturally to me. But you do want to be thoughtful, and I'm not, I think you do whenever you're writing across difference, you need someone to read and offer another perspective. And because you don't want to just assume you're going to get it right. You've got to do your research. You've got to make sure that this is landing right. And so for all my books, I have had readers that were women or people of color. If I'm doing a character like Lionel, who is black, you want to make sure that you're capturing and being fair to that point of view. It's also, and this is something I feel pretty strongly about, like, I do think we need to be able to write across difference, because I think in doing so you can build, it's a gesture of empathy. If we only stay in our lanes and write as ourselves, we're essentially just writing memoir. We're also it's sort of pessimistic. It's like saying we don't have the capability to be empathetic. We don't have the capability to write outside of our own perspective, which I think is just so vital. Now, I will add that you've got to do your work, do your homework, and make sure that when you're doing that, that's part of empathy, though, you're doing it well. And if you don't do it well, be willing to take the criticism. I think that's fine too. I just hope more of this is a dialogue, and not sort of canceling. I'm not a fan of cancel culture, generally speaking. Some of it's because the people who really need to be canceled never really are, so it just isn't effective. And so often the people that could have benefited from a conversation get canceled, and there's no conversation. And so I think, I do think we need to have discussions around this sort of topic. What's the fun of fiction is to write outside of your experience,
And also writing in the 1950s, 60s, that kind of time frame. How do you research that not only with McCarthy, but what people had in their homes, or what they like to drink, or what they like to do for entertainment, like just common things to create your characters so that you kind of feel them out, because their lifestyle would have been way different than it is now in 2024.
There's many levels of research, and I think they're all kind of important. There's the high level research, which, reading, for instance, in my case, reading about Joseph McCarthy and understanding his rise and fall, his relationship to the government, to the times, and then even the role that like the Korean War is sort of playing during this time period, and all the stuff that is kind of doing your history homework. And that's important. It's also really important to figure out what a lived life felt like then. And that can be, you kind of start with cars and clothes and hairdos, right? You want to get the sort of the costume of the time period down. But I had a lot of fun and some difficulty, but a lot of fun. I have, so you'll appreciate this, Al. Judy goes to work at a radio station in the 1950s, and she, they're not letting her on the air yet, but she does get a chance to go on the air, and like kind of dealing with workplace dynamics and how a radio station would work at that time, and the TV was coming in and taking over. So like that was sort of more sort of fun, sort of specific research for the time period. And then, magazines are great, like magazines from the time period, catalogs from the time period, a great way to research like what daily life was like, and answer little questions like, what kind of coffee, someone was drinking at that point in time, or how are they having it? Those little things that, I think those details, they seem small, but they accrue and they really create, a real sort of verisimilitude for the reader, which I think is an important part of, especially if you're writing historical.
Yeah. And then you can see the place you're in and everything, right?
Yeah.
How the characters. So what is it you hope people take away from the book? What is it you want them to think about, or is it just entertainment?
No, it's definitely more than entertainment. I do want it to be entertaining, and I think that's important. I want to create a world, even if it's a world of the past that readers lose themselves in. But, I am up to other things. It's true, I think, in each of my books, and, in this one particularly. I wanted to say something about, certainly how difficult it was in this time period to be out, to be black, to be a woman, and if you had a lot of those things, or you had a cross section of those things, your life became even more difficult. The anger that creates in people, and the results of trauma, and how we sort of process, and in some cases the right way, in some cases the wrong way, process trauma. I did want to sort of show those constraints. This is part of my feeling that we do easily forget exactly what it was like to live and to be in different time periods. And, and there's an ebb and flow to them too. But I think in the 1950s particularly, it was a pretty oppressive time. And I think that I hope my book describes some of that, and really hopefully for readers, makes these characters live for them in a way that they can kind of feel a little bit of what it was like to be who they are at that time. And even in some cases when they're doing bad things, just to be sympathetic, maybe understand a little bit where that comes from. Because I don't write like characters who are like angels. I think it's kind of boring. I like characters that have texture and sometimes make poor choices, or really poor choices. But I think that that's certainly what I hope readers will take away from it.
How do you handle writing the violence in the sense of like speech, like the way people talk to minorities back then, and even gay people, like because it was, first of all, being homosexual was illegal, so
right.
You were a criminal and you had a mental illness, right? So that was just right off the bat, there's something wrong with you. So they didn't necessarily treat you the best. And with gay people, I think they made fun of it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like we see it on TV or something, they'll make a joke of it as being like you're something wrong, and black people as well. I mean, they were treated harshly, or people said harsh things to them. How do you handle that in your book? Do you avoid writing any of that sort of dialogue, or do you stay away from it, or do you actually bring that in?
I do not stay away from it, and I do it with care, but I don't stay away from it. The reason I don't stay away from it is I think if we don't really face the violence of the past, whether it's the use of language or literal violence, both of which occur in my book, we are contributing to essentially a erasure of those things that had happened, even in fiction. If we avoid them, I think we're contributing to sort of an illusion of what the past was. And my goodness, our particularly even these days, the 1950s are held up as this sort of idealistic time period that really crafted even contemporary American identity. I think we're still kind of in this, but if we don't look at what was actually going on, So yeah, I do use, I mean, there are moments, where the violence of the language does come out. I mean, in those moments who's using it and how they're using it, and and they are good guys, And I also particularly wanted to show how it affected the person on the receiving end, what it does emotionally, because I do think we need to understand that. So no, I don't shy away from it. I don't try to lean into it in that sort of way that I think sometimes can happen, where people are trying too hard to make a point or they're getting salacious about it. I think that's as problematic as leaving it out. But you want to find the moment where you can really sort of help the reader understand the impact of language or physical violence, or together, which is often the case. Look, the goal here is to make the reader feel something, and they feel something, and they grow in their understanding of what a character, even if they're fictional, might have experienced. You're growing their empathy, and I think any writer who really cares about character, we may want to entertain, but the other goal, the main goal, is to build empathy and connection between people through our writing. That's kind of what I hope I do. So, but you have to you gotta have those moments of emotional, this is painful, this is a little painful, but you got to get through it so you understand. And then if you're really connected to that character, then the way they behave, and you understand it better, and hopefully root for them more. And I think there's a lot to using it well.
Okay, so now listen, let's talk about how people get a hold of you, social media, website, anything that you want to give out for contact info. Yeah,
I mean, I'm on all the social medias. Certainly you can contact me through my website, which is www.johncopenhaver.com. I'm John Copenhaver, author, on Facebook, and John Copenhaver on Twitter, X, and at John Cope74 on Instagram. And you can even find me on TikTok. God help me.
Well, the book comes out June 4th, and it's called Hall of Mirrors. It's a novel. So the author's been with us, John Copenhaver. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Al.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.